I'll repair the fence at no cost with one condition. I'll spend the night between the two of you. The fence had been standing between the two houses for more than 10 years. It was old, wooden, and once painted white, though time and weather had slowly taken that color away. Now it leaned to one side, cracked in places, with loose boards that moved whenever the wind blew. Neighbors passed by it every day, but no one really noticed it anymore. It had become part of the background, just like the silence inside the house it belonged to. Inside that house lived two people who shared the same roof, but not the same peace. They spoke only when needed, and even then their words were short and careful, as if each sentence might cause another argument. Once they had laughed together, shared meals, and talked late into the night. Now their days passed in quiet routine. Mornings were filled with separate breakfasts. Evenings ended with doors closing in different rooms. The house was full, yet it felt empty. The fence broke during a heavy storm. Strong winds pushed against it all night, and by morning one side had fallen outward. A few boards snapped completely and lay on the ground like forgotten pieces of a puzzle. When the two residents saw it, neither said much. One noticed it while leaving for work. The other saw it later in the day. Both thought the same thing: it needed fixing, but neither wanted to be the first to speak. Days passed. The broken fence remained untouched. It became another problem added to a long list of things they avoided discussing. Each time one of them looked out the window and saw it, there was a quiet feeling of frustration, not just about the fence, but about everything it represented. It was easier to ignore it than to face the deeper cracks in their relationship. Eventually, a neighbor mentioned it. Not in a rude way, just a simple comment about safety and appearance. That was enough to push the issue forward. One of them made a short call to a local handyman whose number had been shared around the neighborhood. The call was brief and polite. An appointment was set for the next afternoon. When the handyman arrived, he didn't rush. He stepped out of his old pickup truck slowly, as if taking in the place before doing anything else. He was not young, but not old either. His clothes were simple, his hands rough from years of work. He carried a toolbox that looked heavy but familiar, like something that had been with him for a long time. He walked toward the fence first. He touched the broken boards, examined the damage, and nodded to himself. But as he stood there, he noticed something else. The house behind the fence felt quiet in a strange way. There were no voices, no movement near the windows. When one of the residents came outside to greet him, the greeting was polite but distant. The other stayed inside. The handyman listened carefully as the problem was explained. He didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, asked a few practical questions, and then glanced toward the house again. Years of working in different homes had taught him something important. Broken things often came with broken stories. And this place, he could feel it, had a story heavier than a damaged fence. When the second resident finally came outside, the air shifted slightly. There was no argument, no raised voice, just a quiet stiffness between them. They stood apart, not looking at each other, both focused on the handyman as if he were a safe space between them. He noticed this too, though he said nothing at first. He explained the repair calmly. He talked about replacing boards, strengthening the base, and making sure it could stand through future storms. His voice was steady, almost comforting. Then came the moment everyone expected: the cost. He paused before answering, looking from one person to the other. Instead of naming a price, he asked a simple question: how long had the fence been standing? They exchanged brief glances, unsure why that mattered. One of them answered quietly. The handyman nodded again, as if confirming a thought in his mind. He said he could fix it properly. He said it wouldn't take long. Then he surprised them by saying he wouldn't charge anything. No labor cost, no material cost, nothing. Both residents were shocked. One immediately questioned him, thinking there must be a mistake. The other looked confused, even suspicious. Free work didn't make sense, especially not good work. The handyman didn't seem offended. He smiled slightly, but his eyes remained serious. He explained that sometimes payment didn't have to be money. Sometimes what mattered more was something else, something harder to give. His words were calm, but they carried weight. The two residents listened closely now, fully focused for the first time in a long while. He didn't explain his condition right away. Instead, he asked them if they were happy. The question landed heavily in the quiet air. No one answered at first. It wasn't an angry question. It wasn't rude. It was honest. Too honest. One of them tried to laugh it off, saying everyone had problems. The other stayed silent. The handyman nodded again, as if he had expected that response. He said he had seen many fences like this one, standing between people, separating spaces, marking boundaries. But he had also seen fences that were built because something inside needed distance. He said he would fix the fence outside. But he believed something else needed attention too. That was when he mentioned his condition. He said it gently, without drama, without making it sound strange. Still, the words shocked them. They both reacted differently. One was uncomfortable immediately, stepping back as if to create space. The other looked confused, trying to understand what he really meant. The handyman was quick to clarify. He wasn't asking for anything inappropriate. He wasn't interested in causing trouble. His condition, he explained, was about presence, not behavior. He said that silence grows when people stop facing each other. He believed that one night, just one, where no one could escape into separate rooms, might force conversations that had been avoided for too long. He said he would simply be there like a neutral ground, making sure the silence didn't win again. The idea felt strange, uncomfortable, risky. The two residents didn't know how to respond. They had spent so much time avoiding each other that the thought of being in the same space for hours felt exhausting. Yet something about the handyman's calm certainty made it hard to dismiss him completely. They asked him why he cared, why he would involve himself in something that wasn't his business. He didn't give a long answer. He simply said he had once lived in a house like this, with a fence that broke and was never fixed in time. His voice lowered slightly when he said it, but he didn't share details. That silence after his words felt different. It wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful. He told them to take time to decide. The fence wouldn't collapse completely in one day. He packed his tools back into his truck and said he would return the next evening if they agreed. If not, he would recommend someone else. As he drove away, the two residents stood there, still separated by a few steps, staring at the broken fence. For the first time in a long while, they were thinking about the same thing, not the cost, not the inconvenience, but the question they had been avoiding for years. How did it get this broken in the first place? That night, the house was quieter than usual, but beneath the silence, something had shifted. The fence outside remained broken, but inside, the first crack in the wall of avoidance had already formed. The next day passed slowly for both of them. The broken fence was still there, visible from the kitchen window and the back door. Every time one of them walked past it, the image of the handyman and his strange offer returned to their mind. Neither spoke about it directly, but the thought stayed with them like an unfinished sentence. Morning came with the usual routine. One woke up early, made tea, and sat at the table scrolling through the phone. The other came out later, nodded briefly, and took breakfast to a different room. Nothing looked different on the surface, yet something felt unsettled inside both of them. The quiet no longer felt normal. It felt heavy, as if it was waiting for a decision. At work, one of them found it hard to focus. Simple tasks took longer than usual. The handyman's words replayed again and again. Silence grows when people stop facing each other. It sounded simple, yet painfully true. Memories surfaced, small arguments that turned into long gaps, moments when one tried to talk and the other wasn't ready. None of it had seemed serious at the time. Now it all felt connected. The other spent the day at home, cleaning things that didn't really need cleaning. Old boxes were moved, shelves were wiped, but the mind stayed restless. At one point, they stood near the bedroom door, hand on the handle, thinking about knocking. The thought passed and the hand dropped. Old habits were hard to break. In the afternoon, clouds gathered again, though no storm came. The wind pushed gently against the broken fence, making a soft sound as loose boards tapped against each other. That sound carried inside the house, reminding them of the problem they were avoiding. Later that evening, they found themselves in the same room without planning it. One was watching the news quietly. The other came in to get something and paused. For a moment, neither moved. Then one of them spoke carefully. "About the fence," they said. The other looked up, surprised but calm. "Yes." There was a pause. Words felt heavy like stones that had to be placed carefully. "What do you think about what he said?" the first asked. The second didn't answer right away. They turned off the television, giving the question the attention it deserved. "I don't know," they said honestly. "It sounds strange, but maybe he's not wrong." That admission changed the air in the room. It wasn't agreement, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a door opening just a little. They talked slowly, choosing words with care. Not about the condition yet, but about the fence itself, about how long it had been there, about the storm that broke it. Small, safe topics. Still, it felt different from their usual short exchanges. This conversation didn't end quickly. Eventually, the condition came up again. One of them admitted feeling uncomfortable about it. The idea of sharing the same space for a whole night felt overwhelming. The other admitted feeling afraid, not of the handyman, but of what might come out if they stopped avoiding each other. They didn't reach a clear decision that night, but they didn't shut the conversation down either. When they went to their separate rooms, neither slept well. Thoughts moved back and forth like restless waves. The next day, the handyman returned, just as he had said he would. He didn't knock right away. He stood near the fence again, checking the boards as if giving them time. When one of them finally came outside, he greeted them with the same calm expression. "We haven't decided yet," they said quickly, almost apologetically. "That's all right," he replied. "Decisions take time." The second resident joined them a moment later. There was no tension in their movement this time, just uncertainty. The handyman noticed the small change. He had learned to read these signs over the years. They asked him more questions now, clear questions, honest ones. They wanted to understand exactly what he meant by his condition. He answered patiently. He explained that he would stay in a shared space, not a private one. He would not interfere unless asked. His role was not to fix them, only to make it harder to hide from each other. "You can think of me as a reminder," he said. "A reminder that you're not alone in that house." One of them asked why he didn't simply charge money like everyone else. He took a deep breath before answering. "I've repaired many fences," he said. "Some were done perfectly. Strong, straight, clean. But when I passed by those houses later, the fences were still standing and the homes behind them were empty, or worse, full of regret. I can't fix that with tools." His words were simple, but they stayed with them. They asked what would happen if the night went badly. He didn't pretend it couldn't. He said discomfort was possible. Silence might still happen, but even that would say something important. "If you don't want to do it," he added, "I won't take offense. I'll give you another number. No hard feelings." That choice mattered. The pressure eased a little. They asked for a few hours to decide. The handyman agreed and said he would return before sunset. He left again, giving them space. Inside the house, they sat at the same table for the first time in months. No phones, no television, just the quiet and the sound of the clock on the wall. That sound had always been there, but today it felt louder. One of them spoke first. "We can keep living like this," they said. "We're doing it already." The other nodded slowly. "Yes, we can." "But do you want to?" came the next question. That was harder to answer. They talked about the past carefully at first, not blaming, not accusing, just remembering. how things had slowly changed, how small hurts were ignored until they grew heavy, how both of them had chosen silence at different times, thinking it would keep peace. They didn't solve everything in that conversation, but they reached one important understanding. Nothing would change if they kept doing the same thing. When the handyman returned in the evening, they were waiting for him together. That alone was a sign. One of them spoke for both. "We'll agree," they said, "but only if everything stays respectful." He nodded without hesitation. Always. That night the fence was not repaired yet. The tools stayed in the truck. Instead, the house prepared for something unfamiliar. The handyman brought a small bag and settled into the common area. He didn't act like a guest. He acted like someone passing through, careful not to take up more space than needed. The three of them shared a simple meal. It wasn't awkward in the way they had feared. Conversation stayed light at first. Daily topics, work, weather, small stories. The handyman listened more than he spoke. As the evening grew quieter, the old silence tried to return. This time, it didn't fully succeed. One of the residents spoke about a memory from years ago, something small but meaningful. The other responded, surprised to hear it remembered. The handyman didn't interrupt. He didn't guide. He simply stayed present, a steady reminder that avoidance was no longer easy. When night finally settled over the house, no one felt completely comfortable, but no one felt alone either. The broken fence stood outside in the dark, waiting. Inside, something more fragile had begun its repair. Not fixed yet, not stable, but finally acknowledged. And that was more than they had expected when the day began. The night moved forward slowly, as if time itself was unsure how to behave in this house. The lights in the common area stayed on, soft and warm, not too bright. Outside, the wind had calmed and the broken fence stood quietly under the dark sky. Inside, the three of them sat in the same space, not close, not far, just present. At first, no one spoke. The quiet felt different now. It was no longer sharp or uncomfortable. It felt like a pause, the kind that comes before something important. The handyman sat on a chair near the wall, his hands resting on his knees. He did not look at them directly, giving them space without leaving. One of the residents cleared their throat and spoke softly. "I don't even remember when we stopped talking like we used to." The words were simple, but they opened something that had been locked for a long time. The other resident looked down at the floor, then slowly nodded. "I remember," they said. "It wasn't one big fight. It was many small ones." That was true. The problems had not arrived all at once. They had grown quietly, like cracks that form when no one is watching. Missed conversations, hurt feelings that were never explained, apologies that were delayed until they felt too late. As they talked, the handyman stayed silent. He did not correct them or guide the direction. He had learned that people often knew what they needed to say. They just needed a reason to start. One of them spoke about feeling unseen, about trying to share worries and being met with short answers or tired silence. The other listened, really listened, without interrupting. When it was their turn, they spoke about feeling overwhelmed, about not knowing how to respond, about choosing quiet because it felt safer than saying the wrong thing. The room felt heavy with honesty, but also lighter somehow. Words that had been trapped inside for years were finally finding air. There were moments when voices trembled, moments when sentences stopped halfway because emotions grew too strong. Each time there was a pause. No one rushed to fill it. At one point, one of them laughed quietly through tears. "We're terrible at this," they said. The other smiled sadly. "We always have been." That small shared moment mattered. It reminded them of who they once were before distance took over. The handyman shifted slightly in his chair, making a soft sound. Both of them glanced at him, then back at each other. His presence was a gentle anchor, not a judge, not a stranger anymore, just someone holding the space steady. As the night deepened, they talked about regrets, about moments they wished they could return to and handle differently. One spoke about a time they had needed support but felt alone. The other admitted they had noticed but didn't know how to help and chose to stay silent instead. That confession hurt, but it also explained so much. Anger softened when understanding took its place. They were not enemies. They had just been afraid. The conversation was not smooth. There were moments when voices rose slightly, when old pain pushed forward. But each time they stopped themselves, they breathed, they remembered why they were here. "I don't want to keep living like strangers," one of them said quietly. "Neither do I," the other replied. Those words stayed in the air, strong and clear. At some point the handyman spoke for the first time in a while. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You don't need to solve everything tonight," he said. "You just need to keep listening." They both nodded. That felt manageable. The hours passed. The clock on the wall marked time, but no one checked it. Outside, the neighborhood slept, unaware of the quiet work happening inside this house. Inside, two people were slowly learning how to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. There were tears, but also small smiles, memories shared, stories retold from different sides, each one filling in gaps the other never knew existed. They realized how often they had assumed intentions instead of asking questions. At one point, one of them stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the broken fence. "It's strange," they said. "That fence has been broken for days, but it feels like it's been broken much longer." The other joined them, standing a little closer than usual. "Maybe we didn't notice it before," they said. "Or maybe we didn't want to." The handyman watched quietly, saying nothing. As the night grew late, exhaustion settled in. Not the tiredness that comes from long days, but the deep kind that follows emotional effort. Still, no one suggested ending the conversation. It felt too important. They spoke about the future carefully. Not big promises, just small hopes. Eating meals together again, talking without fear, asking questions instead of making assumptions. "I can't promise I won't mess up," one of them said. "I don't need perfect," the other replied. "I just need honest." That felt like a fair place to start. Eventually, silence returned, but this time it was gentle. They sat quietly, sharing the same space without tension. The handyman checked the time and stood up slowly. "I'm going to rest for a bit," he said. "I'll be right here if you need anything." He settled into a corner, closing his eyes but not fully sleeping. His job was nearly done, though he didn't think of it that way. The two residents remained by the window for a while longer. No words were needed now. The hardest part had already happened. They had faced each other. When they finally went to rest, they did not retreat to opposite ends of the house as they usually did. They stayed closer, not out of habit but out of choice. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet decision to not pull away. As the night slowly turned toward morning, something had changed. Not everything was fixed. Not all wounds were healed. But the silence that once filled the house had lost its power. Outside, the fence waited for repair. Inside, something more important had already begun to mend. And for the first time in a long while, the house felt like a place where healing was possible. Morning arrived slowly, as if it did not want to disturb what had taken place during the night. Soft light entered the house through the windows, touching the walls and furniture in a gentle way. The house felt different now. It was still the same space, with the same rooms and the same quiet sounds, but something unseen had shifted. One of them woke up first and sat quietly listening. There was no tension in the air, no heavy silence, just calm. For a moment they wondered if the night had been a dream, but then they heard movement nearby and felt relief. It was real. The handyman was already awake. He moved carefully, trying not to disturb anyone. He stepped outside with his tools and stood near the broken fence. The morning air was cool and fresh. Birds made soft sounds in the distance. He took a deep breath and began his work. The sound of tools reached inside the house. Wood being measured, nails being placed carefully. Each sound was steady and patient, not rushed. When the second resident woke up, they noticed the noise and smiled slightly. The fence was finally being repaired. They both came into the common area, standing near each other without planning it. There was a small pause, then one of them spoke. "Good morning." "Good morning," the other replied. It was a simple exchange, but it felt important. They shared a quiet smile, not forced, not nervous, just real. They made breakfast together. Not a special meal, just something simple. But the act itself mattered. They moved around the kitchen without stepping away from each other, asking small questions, offering help. There were no big conversations, but there was comfort in the ordinary. Outside, the handyman worked steadily. He replaced broken boards, strengthened weak parts, and made sure everything was aligned properly. He treated the fence with care, as if it mattered deeply. And in a way, it did. This fence had become a symbol, even if no one said it out loud. One of the residents stepped outside with a cup of tea and offered one to the handyman. He accepted with a nod and a quiet thank you. They stood for a moment, watching the fence take shape again. "You did good work inside," the handyman said gently without looking up. The resident paused, then nodded. "We still have work to do," they replied. "That's always how it is," the handyman said. "Fixing isn't a single moment, it's a decision you make again and again." They stood in silence after that, comfortable and thoughtful. As the morning continued, the fence slowly returned to its proper form, straight, strong, whole again. Neighbors passed by and nodded in approval. To them, it was just a fence being fixed. They did not know what it had represented. Inside the house, the second resident cleaned a little, opening windows and letting fresh air in. Sunlight filled the rooms. Dust moved through the air and disappeared. It felt like the house itself was breathing again. Later, all three of them shared a simple lunch. The mood was lighter now. There were small jokes, gentle laughter, nothing loud or dramatic, but enough to feel human again. The handyman listened and smiled, knowing his role was nearly complete. After lunch, he finished the final touches on the fence. He stepped back, wiped his hands, and inspected his work carefully. Then he nodded to himself, satisfied. "It should last," he said. "As long as it's cared for." The two residents stepped outside together to look at it. The fence stood strong and clean, no longer leaning or broken. It marked the boundary of the yard clearly, but it did not feel like a barrier anymore. "Thank you," one of them said sincerely. "Yes," the other added, "for more than just the fence." The handyman smiled softly. "You did the hard part," he replied. "I just held the space." He gathered his tools and placed them back into his truck. Before leaving, he turned back to them one last time. "Remember," he said, "when something feels broken, don't wait for a storm to notice it." They nodded, understanding the meaning behind his words. As he drove away, the sound of his truck faded down the street. The house felt quiet again, but not empty. The quiet now felt peaceful. That afternoon, the two residents sat together in the yard, facing the repaired fence. They talked about small plans, things they wanted to do, meals they wanted to share, walks they wanted to take. Nothing grand, just steps forward. There were still moments of uncertainty. They both knew that one night could not erase years of distance, but they also knew something important had changed. They had faced the silence instead of hiding from it. At one point, one of them reached out and gently touched the other's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried trust. The other responded by staying still, accepting it. As evening came, the house settled into a new rhythm. They prepared dinner together again, sharing stories from their day. The fence outside stood quietly, no longer demanding attention. When night returned, it did not bring fear or discomfort. It brought rest. They went asleep knowing the work was not finished, but it had begun. And sometimes that is enough. Outside, under the soft glow of the streetlight, the fence stood strong. Inside, two people were learning how to stand together again. The repair was complete, not just in wood and nails, but in something far more important. The days that followed were quiet, but not the empty kind of quiet they had lived with before. This quiet felt steady and calm, like a gentle river instead of a locked room. The repaired fence stood firm outside, but inside the house, the real work continued in small, careful steps. On the first morning after the handyman left, they woke up without rushing. There was no heavy feeling pushing them into separate routines. One of them made tea and, without thinking too much about it, poured 2 cups instead of one. The other noticed and smiled. It was a small thing, but it mattered. They sat at the table together, not talking much, just sharing the moment. The clock ticked on the wall, but it no longer sounded loud or impatient. It simply marked time moving forward. Later that day, they decided to walk along the fence line together. The wood was smooth and strong now. One of them ran a hand along it and said, "It looks simple, but a lot of care went into this." The other nodded. "So does everything that lasts." They both understood what that really meant. Life did not suddenly become perfect. There were moments when old habits tried to return. Times when one of them felt like staying quiet instead of speaking. Times when tiredness made patience harder. But now they noticed those moments, and noticing made a difference. One evening, after a long day, one of them grew quiet again. The room felt tense for a moment. Before this, silence might have grown into distance. This time the other spoke gently. "Are you okay?" The question was simple, but it stopped the silence from spreading. The first took a deep breath and answered honestly, "I'm tired, not upset, just tired." "Thank you for telling me," the other said. That was new, and it felt good. They began to build new habits, eating at least one meal together each day, asking questions instead of making assumptions, saying sorry when needed without waiting too long. None of these things were dramatic, but together they slowly changed the shape of their days. Sometimes they talked about the handyman, about how unexpected his arrival had been, how strange his condition had seemed at first. One of them wondered aloud if he had ever fixed a fence at their house by accident, or if he had known exactly what he was doing. "I think he knew," the other said. "Some people can see things clearly because they've lived them." They never heard from him again. No phone calls, no visits, but his presence remained in quiet ways, in the way they faced problems sooner, in the way they stayed in the same room when things felt uncomfortable. Weeks passed. The fence held strong through wind and rain. Neighbors stopped commenting on it because there was nothing left to say. It had become normal again. But for the 2 people inside the house, it was a reminder. One afternoon, while cleaning, one of them found an old photo tucked into a drawer. It showed them from years ago, standing close, smiling without effort. They brought it to the other and placed it on the table. "We've changed," one of them said. "Yes," the other replied, "but we're still here." They decided to keep the photo out, not as a reminder of the past, but as proof that connection was possible. There were setbacks too, a disagreement about money, a misunderstanding about plans. Voices rose slightly. Tension filled the room. For a brief moment it felt like old times. Then one of them stopped and said, "We're doing it again." The other paused, then nodded. "Let's slow down." They sat, they breathed, they talked, not perfectly but honestly. The argument did not disappear, but it did not turn into distance. When it ended, they felt tired, but also proud. Healing, they learned, was not about avoiding problems. It was about facing them together. As seasons changed, the yard outside filled with new colors. Leaves fell, then returned. The fence remained steady through it all. Inside, the house felt warmer, not because anything had been added, but because something heavy had been removed. One evening, they sat on the porch watching the sky darken. One of them said quietly, "I used to think silence meant peace." The other answered, "Sometimes it does, but only when it's chosen together." They sat with that thought for a long time. Months later, during another storm, rain hit the fence hard. The wind pushed against it, testing its strength. Inside, the 2 of them stood by the window, watching. "It's holding," one of them said. "Yes," the other replied, "because it was fixed properly." The storm passed. The fence remained. That night, as they prepared for bed, one of them paused and said, "I'm glad we didn't ignore it." "Me too," the other said. "Both the fence and everything else." They turned off the lights and rested, not worried about what the morning would bring. Somewhere else, perhaps, the handyman was repairing another fence. Or maybe he was simply living quietly, knowing he had done something meaningful. They would never know. What they did know was this: problems don't disappear when ignored. They grow. But when faced with honesty, patience, and courage, even long-standing damage can be repaired. The fence outside would someday need care again. Wood always does. And when that time came, they knew they would handle it together. Inside the house, trust continued to grow. Slowly. Carefully, strong enough to last. And in that steady, ordinary life, they found something they had almost lost. Not perfection, but connection.